Community Engagement Program Manager at New York City Emergency Management. I've been there 10 years. Again, I live in the neighborhood, and I came into this work as a spontaneous volunteer responding to Hurricane Sandy. So that's a lot of why I'm here, why I continue in this work. And now we're going to get right into an individual and hurricane emergency preparedness presentation for Park Slope parents. I did put a few slides in that were very neighborhood specific, and Susan and I have already gone through them, but we're excited to see our discussion. So what we do at New York City Emergency Management, maybe some of you, if you've been around for a while, might remember us more like OEM or the Office of Emergency Management. We prepare New Yorkers before, during, and after emergencies through preparedness, education programs, and also we respond to events. We like to put this image there on the left of the disaster management cycle. The blue up in the top left corner is titled Preparedness. That's what we're doing now. The disaster happens, that's in red. And then the response is what first responders do, and then also third or second responders do as volunteers or neighborhood folks. Recovery hopefully happens after the response phase. And then the best neighborhoods, and I really include Park Slope and Gowanus in this, and my neighborhood of Windsor Terrace too, because we've been hit a lot with stormwater flooding, get involved with mitigation steps, which means taking steps to lessen the effect, particularly of stormwater flooding or coastal flood water flooding on our homes. This is the basis for this is my emergency plan. We also call it My Plan for short. It comes in these 13 different languages. And you can scan the QR code to download a copy to your computer. We also have hard copies available for people who like to work with hard copies. We're going to go through most of the steps of what you need to put into the plan, and Susan is going to interject with tips and questions for parents, especially, and for families about how you can particularize it for your family. Maybe some questions you want to ask or think about what you can do with your caregiver, what you might want to ask at school, summer camp, after school. The possibilities are endless when they go over to Aunt Tilly's house in New Jersey. So there are 3 basic steps to preparedness. So we had the My Plan that was featured in the previous slide, and with it we make a plan and we write it down. Why do we write it down? We write it down because when an emergency or a disaster happens, we're not calm, cool, and collected. We're spinning in 1,000 different directions, and we're making phone calls, or we don't have our cell phone and we can't make phone calls. So we need to have something written down to follow to guide us through those first few hours and days of a large-scale emergency. The second primary step is to actually gather supplies, and we're going to get into the weeds with it and show you what you can do and how you can think about making it really specific to your family and your family's needs. But here's just a screenshot of a generic supply kit. The image on the right, it says stay informed, and the city's free emergency alert system is called Notify NYC, and when we get to the end of the presentation, we'll show you an easy way to sign up for that. One of the primary modules for a really fantastic emergency plan for a family is to have an emergency support network. What is that? It's just so you know where you're going to go if you can't go back to your regular place, and that they know that you're coming. So if you have relatives in the Bronx, like in Tremont, you want to let them know, hey, you know, we're going to have a coastal storm surge. I live in Gowanus. I don't want to be in my house in Gowanus when that happens. Can I stay with you? And you've worked that out ahead of time. You also want to know where your emergency supplies are. A lot of people like to leave it at the front door of their house or apartment, so it's just easy to grab as they're exiting. If you use medical equipment or if you have family members who use them, know where they are, know where the backups are, where the backup batteries are, the supplies, the lists are endless. And this is where everyone really gets to customize the plan for themselves and their family. And who's in your support network? A minimum of 2, right? 5 would be fantastic. Somebody in the city and somebody outside the city. And particularly when we get into the neighborhood, it's great to have someone in the neighborhood, because if there's like a smoke condition, say your neighbor next door, and this happens, the most common emergency in New York City is fire. So let's say your neighbor has a fire, there's no damage to your structure, but you can't occupy your house or apartment because of the smoke damage. You want to stay in the neighborhood so you can monitor things and get supplies. And then outside, in case something more catastrophic happens to like a large part of the neighborhood.
I'm going to interject here. Go back a slide for me, please.
Sure.
And this idea that we were talking about before this webinar started, what if you have a nanny? Or if you have 2 nannies and your nanny is with your child? So can you talk a little bit about that?
Fantastic. So we actually do have a special presentation for caregivers. So, we can, I can find the slide deck from my colleagues and we can send that on. But your nanny should have her own plan, right? What if and usually most of us do, but we think of it, I think, more informally. What if I can't get to work? I know nannies who would back each other up, if they couldn't take care of the kids, or maybe they had a doctor's appointment, made an arrangement with their employer to say, look, Sheila's going to watch while I go to the doctor for these 2 hours. She's got both of the kids. They're going to be inside. Just want to make sure you know. So that this is something that's not unaccustomed for most of the nannies that work in our neighborhood. And also, but just so that they have all those phone numbers and that they also have things written down, and know where to go and know where you might go, right? Because what happens if you're at work in Manhattan or Queens and you can't get back to Brooklyn? So, this point, which I love that Sue brought this up, of making sure that your nannies are incorporated into your emergency planning, is critical.
And likewise, that nanny has their own family and has their own plan that they need, and those need to work together if they're taking care of your child.
100%. In
And
fact, yeah,
ahead.
we have an advanced warning system, and we don't use it specifically for nannies. It's used by home care agencies who have a similar issue. So they use it particularly for coastal storm situations where you have advance notice, especially if there's an evacuation called. And I know home care companies that will break down the messaging and say, okay, you're going to have to be prepared to stay with, Miss Smith in Brighton Beach for up to 7 days. You need to make sure your household is taken care of in Rego Park so that you can do that. So that's a great point.
And then I would also say we also have a aging parents group on Park Slope Parents. If you didn't know, if you're here and didn't know that. So if you've got your aging parents live in Manhattan, then how do you fold their plan into your plan? Because then if they're in a home, you need to know what the home's plan is, meaning a assisted living, those kinds of things. So a lot of it's just knowing what their plans are. And the final thing that we talked about before we started this is all schools have a plan. All DOE schools have a plan. But what about after schools programs? What about summer camps? If there's something that happens in a summer camp, and your kids at summer camp, ask your summer camps, ask your after schools, what are their emergency plans? So that's it.
Really appreciate the point about if you have parents in the nearby neighborhood that you're responsible for. So I'm going to throw this out as a suggestion. It's just it's something that Sue said that made me think of it, which is make it a family event, like a fun thing. Bring tea and cookies, whatever they like, and just say, oh, we're going to just go over this thing and want to make sure that you know where we're going to be and we know you're going to be if for some reason you can't be in your apartment. So these are great things, but to that point, everyone needs their own plan. Everyone needs their own plan. So we're going to get more into the weeds in it in the next few slides. I kind of covered why you should write down information, health and life-saving information especially, and your emergency support network phone numbers, just in case your phone doesn't work. Maybe you didn't charge it all the way. Maybe your battery drained. Maybe you did a Zoom meeting on your cell phone, which if I did a Zoom or Teams meeting on my phone, I would drain my battery. So you just want to have that backup for that important information. Other categories, personal health, very specific information to you and your kids. Any special health equipment or supplies, and of course, any healthcare provider and insurance information. I also know we do, I think I might have taken those slides out, but you're going to want to have copies of your important documents in your go bag in a waterproof bag. And most people either want to know where they're, if they have a lease, have a copy of it. If you, and to know your mortgage information, that's really huge. A communications plan, and this seems like, oh, but we all have phones and we're fine. But what we're asking people to consider is, what if your normal way of communicating is affected by a big disaster or a change in the environment or a power outage or confusion? What are some alternatives that you could do? Whether you have a place that you go to or a different way to communicate with your family members. I kept my hardwired phone from doing this work just because if the cell phones go, I still have a phone that's plugged into the wall. So, and I pay a lot of money for it, but that was how I dealt with my own anxiety.
So Jill, we talked, if you have a teenager, what's the chances that they know all the phone numbers that they need to know? That's another thing.
I would say that's probably minimal unless you have someone who's got that kind of mind, right?
So your kids need somewhere to have a way to get a hold of you.
Right.
And I think what I've read in the past is that maybe you have one phone number of I call Aunt Betty and my daughters call Aunt Betty, and they're the point of contact because they're outside the emergency zone.
Yes, I use that. We call that a call tree, a bit of a call tree, but I've used it just in terms of family communication. You know, when you have a lot of family members, and let's say, which happened to my family, you know, my father-in-law was in the hospital having surgery. We made an arrangement so not everybody was, you know, calling my mother-in-law, you know, okay, this one's going to take care of this. You're going to call, you know, Aunt B, you're going to call Uncle Fred. And so we made that arrangement to kind of take some of the pressure off of them. So that's another way you can use that alternative communications plan to make that happen.
Do you have
But
a
that's a
sense?
great point about the teenagers and young kids. I think actually probably your younger children will be more likely to know their parents' phone number than a teenager.
And at what age do you think they can learn their parents' phone number or their address? Because I think we underestimate
Five,
kids are.
5 years old.
Okay.
I
So
mean, I
should
will just tell you, my mother was in an incarceration camp during World War II in Utah. And my mother remembered when she was in her 50s, her barrack number, the block number, everything. She knew exactly that because there's something about the way kids pick up information when they're that little that it just stays with them. So start them young, but we also talked, and Sue, you want to talk about that? How you want to make this conversation and include the kids that's suitable for their, you know, emotional and intellectual age?
Yeah, if you make it something, it's a little like giving them chores instead of saying, oh, I'll give you money if you do the dishes. It becomes part of their life. We make these plans just in case we don't think it's going to happen, but the emotions of kids you have to do it tailored to your child. You don't want to go, we might die tomorrow, you know? So yeah,
But you
teen
can make it fun too and make it, you know, let's practice walking up to Connecticut Muffin I mean, I still have a Connecticut muffin where I am in Windsor Terrace. So that's where we're going to meet, if anything happens, during the day. And then they get to practice and take their little bag and trot up there. That's not going to work with teenagers, but it will work with the younger children.
Yeah. And I will put the documentation, there's a really nice graphic for kids to look at. Here's why we plan. And I'm going to try to pull that up at the end if we have time. But keep going. Sorry.
That sounds good. I'd love to see that. Um, this is a lot of, for people with special needs, we're going to touch on it. This is not a special needs emergency preparedness presentation, but I think it really applies also to a lot of us who either we're getting older or family members are getting older. I've noticed that certain things become harder for some of my family members as they age, particularly things that are written down. And that's where speech comes more important, or a strong visual cue. And then also, again, we stress the alternative methods of communication. And if you do have a disability that affects communication, what else might you do? Having pre-written messages, especially for people for whom English is a second language, letting people know that you use a device to communicate, etc., or what language you speak. I just watched the new show, The Pit, and the first episode they had a woman and they couldn't figure out what language she was speaking, and finally the doctor brought out her phone and had this map of the world, and they kept zooming in, and finally they figured out that she was from Nepal, which I thought was brilliant, actually, that she did the map. And just just keeping in mind that people need different kinds of communications. So whether it might be our nanny who speaks a couple of languages, or our kids who are young, we want to be sensitive to everyone's needs when we make our plan. I touched on this already, the evacuation plan. I'm not going to if you want to do a fire presentation, I recommend the American Red Cross or FDNY. I'm not going to do that. Just know that we should all know whether or not we're in a fire safe building. If you're in a structure that's 6 stories or less, it is not necessarily fire safe. That's why we have fire escapes in most of our limestones and brownstones. Evacuate immediately if you smell gas, see smoke, or fire. Close the door behind you. One lesson to learn tonight: close the door behind you and call 911.
And if you live in a building like I have, there's 30 units in my building.
How many stories?
It's 8. And it's
by law, that's a fire safe building in New York City.
yeah, it's the old Ansonia clock. But if you have time and you have pre-prepared and you know where everybody else's pets are. I've got 3 cats. They'd be toast if I didn't have people to go rescue them. Now you might not have time, but knowing and there's I think it's the fire department has something you can put on your door that says this apartment has pets.
Incredible. Yes, absolutely. Transportation plan. Some of us, because those of us who live on the F line, regularly have to make alternative plans, or the G line for that matter, especially if it's the weekends. So I feel like we're pretty expert at it, but just in case, making that plan, if you do rely on public transportation, is really important. Especially, again, if you have people with disabilities, mobility issues, and or small children, you want to really take that into consideration when you're making your emergency plans. Sheltering in place. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but you may see that come across your Notify NYC message that the city's advising people to stay in place. More commonly in the summer, what we might hear is get that air quality alert. We already got one. This is probably the earliest time I've ever seen it in recent years. And that's really something for people that do have compromised respiratory systems to pay attention to. That we didn't call for that today, but we just said it's going to be a little tricky, and we haven't been used to having that for a little while. Where are the city's emergency shelters? They are set up in schools and city buildings and some places of worship. The main one in our area is at John Jay. And all that information can be either at 311, that's the primary source, or Notify NYC, if we sent that up. We are going to touch a little bit on hurricane evacuation zones because we're coming up on that season. Coastal storm season starts June 1st, so this is pretty timely. New York's main season begins August and runs through the end of November. It's a very long window for hurricane season. And if you remember Hurricane Sandy back in 2012, that happened at the end of October. And then not even a week later, we had a nor'easter with snow. It was a very crazy weather cycle at that point. The screenshot is for our hurricane evacuation zone finder. Zone 1 is the red. It's kind of hard to see on the screenshot. You'll see it on some subsequent slides where I have it a little bit more dramatic. And Gowanus has several red zones. Mostly Gowanus is zone 2. And Red Hook is zone 1, the Rockaways, Coney Island, Brighton Beach, etc. Most of that area is zone 1. Zone 2, if we call an evacuation, typically we will call zone 1. If you hear zone 2 is being called, that should alert you to know that it's a large scale event. And we added this numbering system after Sandy because we really wanted people to know how far storm surge could move over land to affect their neighborhoods. I don't know, I seem to be just anticipating every side. I did already say this information. What happens if you're ordered to evacuate? Well, you're going to have this beautiful emergency plan and you're going to have your contact up in the Bronx that you've already contacted to say, hey, we're coming to stay. Bring in the 3 cats. I've got my cat food. I've got my cat bowls. Just need some water from you. And probably I should bring the cat box too, I would guess. And if people can't evacuate because of a disability or some kind of other access or functional need, and they have no other options, they can request assistance from the city by calling 311. But we do highly encourage everybody to make their individual plan. Now, this is the hurricane evacuation zone map for our neighborhood, Red Hook, Carroll Gardens, Gowanus, and Park Slope. Sue, what do you want to add in about this map? What did you tell me about that you observed when we first started talking?
Well, all the gray zones are not 1 through 6, correct?
Correct.
Correct. But then you go, okay, Park Slope is called Park Slope because it's a slope off the park. So that makes sense. So it's a high point. But what about Carroll Gardens?
Right. So Carroll Gardens, there is even, if you looked at an elevation map, you would see that they have a slightly higher elevation. That water is not really going to travel up that hill. If you think about the trench, and going up, it's not going up that hill into Carroll Gardens. Does that mean, although what I will say, looking at it, do we think that Carroll Gardens will be safe from other consequences of a hurricane or coastal storm?
Oh, absolutely. Whether or not you can get out in a car or get out if everywhere around you is flooded.
So I will also share a little bit of my experience from Sandy is that we had damage from our combined sewage system miles away from the coast. So we had somebody who put in a claim in Bedford-Stuyvesant, no, Flatbush, Central Flatbush, from damage because their second floor bathroom backed up. And a lot of roof damage in Bed-Stuy from the wind. So there are a lot of impacts. Also power outage. That's one of the, and that happened during Sandy big time. The power goes out. So we still, even if we're not in a hurricane evacuation zone in Brooklyn, in southern Brooklyn, we should have a plan because coastal storm impacts are not only from the flood event. This is, and I'm not going to spend that much time on it, but this is a reflection, to my mind, also of some of the flooding that we've had, certainly from 2020 through 2023 in our neighborhoods. And this was created by DEP a little bit before Ida, which was 2021. And this reflects if we get 2 inches, 2.13 inches an hour plus 2050 sea level rise. So this projection was for some time in the future. And then it happened 3 months later. And that's why I like to show these slides, because if we go to the next slide, it's even more dramatic with extreme flooding event of 3.6 inches an hour, which recently just happened in Austin, Texas, where they had so much rain and hail, and there was some neighborhoods that saw some dire consequences. So even though this is a projection for 2080 sea level rise plus a bad storm, a lot of us have seen this, particularly on September 29th, 2023, with that big storm that came through, which did have like a little post-tropical name, but it's not important. The important thing was that we lived through it.
So for those of you who don't remember the date, we had a clothing swap, an outdoor clothing swap planned the day before. And if you look at Washington Park, that was where that clothing swap was to be. And lots of flooding right around there. And right across the street is where the U-Haul was. We couldn't even really get the U-Haul in and out without going over extreme water. This is also a good map if you're looking to move to a place to go, okay, what is up with 2nd Street between 5th and 7th Avenue? Those places flood. So if you're looking for right by 321 during that September 29th was crazy. They had like, what, 2 feet of snow or 2 feet of rain in the playground. So anyway,
Yeah.
I digress.
Yeah, and that's such a good point. And also to know, Park Slope, this is something I learned from one of the City Sponges members, which is Sam Robinson from Formfield. And he has a map in his presentation where he shows that the aquifers that are underneath Prospect Park. So when I think about 9/29, I also remember that that was maybe the 6th or 7th weekend of a lot of rain. So our ground was saturated. Prospect Park normally absorbs a ton of water for us, right? But think about it. 6 or 7 weekends of a lot of rain, it was soaked. And that's why on that date, the park spewed water down Prospect Park Southwest. It rolled across 10th Avenue and 11th Avenue near where I live on Sherman Street. And a New York Times reporter who was writing about it or quoted said that there were whitecaps on 11th Avenue at PS 154. So for me, this map and my block, by the way, told to, we're not mapped. And we've had more flooding from 2020 to 2023 than in the other 20 years plus that I've lived on the block. So that's why we all want to get prepared.
Can you talk? This
Yes.
is the slide I want you to talk about. So there you go.
Okay, so you said we were spent a little bit of time on basement apartments, but I will say that after Hurricane Ida in 21, the city changed its messaging to have much more specific pointed messaging for basement apartments. And so what Sue and I were talking about was the people in our neighborhoods who live in the basements typically are, in my block, tenants, older young adults, not children, but young adults who are living at home. They might have their own space in the basement, teenagers. Sometimes the young adult family member might take the basement and put their parents on the 1st floor, 2nd floor. So in our 1 to 4 family housing stock, this is fairly common that certain basements are being occupied, particularly like on our streets in Windsor Terrace, a few of them in Park Slope, where you have the basement is sort of partially under the street level and then partially the windows, can look onto the street. And those apartments flood all the time on my block. Um, and what we're telling people to do is not to just run out of your apartment, because if you're getting like a lot of flooding in a basement, you're going to want to go up into the upstairs apartments to get out of harm's way. Because if you go out into the street, if people went out into the street during Ida, they could have died, because the flood waters, it's not just the amount of water, it's the rate and the speed at which the flood waters can just knock you down. And you think about it, if you're an older person or you're a person with a certain kind of disability, that could take you out. If you're a little kid, that, I mean, I don't want to traumatize anyone, but unfortunately, it is a common thing that little kids get separated by their parents when they go into the floodwaters. So our strongest caution is to go up, not out, and to sign up for our basement alerts, which we're going to get into in a little bit. Staying away from windows if you're in that apartment building is an excellent idea. And now we're going to get into the fun part, which is the go bag. What can you put in your go bag? It could be any bag, any backpack is a good idea, because you're going to want to have that weight equally distributed. If you really do a thorough job in your backpack, in your go bag, it could weigh a good 8 to 10 pounds. Some people like to have small suitcases on wheels. That's fine too. And everyone in the family, and we've already talked about it, should have their bag, including our pets should have their little bag with their food and their toys. Our nannies should have a bag. Our kids should have a bag, especially with some fun toys or books, things to keep them occupied if they're at a shelter. And again, when to change out supplies. I think it's a fun thing to do with family members once a year. Make it a party, make it a picnic in the summer. Woo, it's coastal storm season. Let's change out our supplies and eat all of our granola bars or kind bars. Go for it. Sue, do you want to add in a note about what kids might think to
Yeah,
put in their go bags?
I mean, one of the things that we talked about was the idea that if you have picky kids, and sometimes they like something and sometimes they don't, you need to change that go bag fairly frequently. What about diapers? If you've got a bunch of diapers and you didn't, you haven't updated your go bag in a year, then those diapers aren't going to fit anymore. And we are talking about wipes. Wipes dry out after a little while. I'm going to put in my daughter. She wasn't obsessed with them. She loved this book series called I Survived. It's when disaster strikes, heroes are made. I'm going to put it in
Oh
the,
my God, I need this. I need the series.
but it's written about kids who survived, and it's kind of, to me, it was kind of this resiliency thing, like, oh my gosh, there was a fire, and this kid did this and this and this. So I think it's a good series for little kids to kind of go, oh, these bad things happened, but we survived because we used our heads. So I put that.
Oh, I love it. Thanks. I'll take a moment to download the chat at the end. Okay, we're at 8:20. Pet supplies. I'm not going to go into it, but you get the idea here. Also, having a picture of your pet is always a handy thing, as you mentioned, in case the firefighters have to come to your house. If you have those pictures handy and you can show them, then they know what they're looking for. And you'll be able to review this when we send this out post meeting, but we're not going to get, because we want to get through. I still have quite a bit to get through.
Just one comment about the pets. I know that during Hurricane Sandy, they didn't allow pets into certain shelters if they didn't have their vaccination records, correct?
Okay, well, we actually didn't have most pets, but the city has changed its policy, but it's very specific. We're not asking for vaccination records. However, your pet may not be able to stay with you in an evacuation shelter. So that's going to be just like a series of cots in a gymnasium. And there will be a separate room or separate area just for pets. So you have to have them in a cage, etc. And the reason for that is for safety and for allergies, that we can't expose the general population who may have pet allergies, but they're allowed. The exception is if you have a service animal who performs a function for you, like a seeing eye dog, they are allowed to stay with their person. Great, great question and observation. So the city changed their policy. That's one thing I've observed over the years, is that when something happens that causes them to go, we have to change this, they do it. It may take them a while, but they do it. More shelter and space supplies. Again, we touched on this. I'm not going to really go into the weeds because we still have another third to go through. Cash, small bills, big deal. So whether it's California, which Sue has an example from, Florida, which I have an example from, the pharmacies their electricity might be out for 5 days. You can't pay your copay with your card, but you can give them the copay in cash. So you really want to have 5s and 10s available, and mostly 5s, right? And portable cell phone and also tablet and computer chargers, very critical.
Important, I don't see it on the list. How important are the N95 masks?
Not so much, in my opinion. I mean, you can have it if you're a person who likes to use it. You should have some. We do recommend personal PPE. We used to have pictures of it that it was construction masks, which of course are not N95s. We're all expert with masks now after COVID. But you have to kind of take into consideration your own comfort level. The city shelters will have some supplies like that. But if you're a person that likes to have a certain kind of mask, you should definitely put that in your go bag. It's
Yeah,
not on this list, but it's on the picture visual list, and it's on the checklist in the My Emergency Plan.
yeah. For fire, they also said, because I was looking at the stuff from California, eye drops.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm from California, so also in earthquake country, you have a pair of boots that you keep by your bed, steel-toed boots preferably, but hiking boots or workers' boots can do in a pinch.
got it.
So that's a lot of people have that. We touched a little bit on extra considerations. If anybody in your family has a disability or an access or functional need, how are you going to get your information? How do they communicate? If they rely on electrical medical equipment, you do definitely want to register with your electrical service provider in case there's a brownout or stoppage in your area. They're not going to do anything except they're going to tell you that there's going to be a disruption in service. So it's up to us to make the plan for what we're going to do, where we're going to go, should that happen. So I do want to stress that. All right, now we're talking about emergency notifications, Notify NYC. I'm hoping that most of you are signed up. If not, this is your moment. You can take a moment off of Instagram in case you were scrolling while you were listening to us. Text Notify NYC to 692-692 to sign up for alerts today. When prompted during the sign up process, provide your zip code. And this is a new thing that just rolled out in the last 6 weeks, is you can get neighborhood-based SMS text alerts. Those to me are so valuable. I mean, you want to know what's happening if you're not going to be able to. I remember one day there was a massive subway disruption, and for me, getting out at 4th Avenue and then having to walk up that big hill to the park and then another 6-7 blocks to my house is a lot. And I would have liked that, to made an alternative plan, try to get on the bus, whatever.
So you mentioned before we got on that you put in different zip codes.
That's when you sign up via the website. You can
Okay.
put up to 5 different zip codes. So for families especially, you can put in where you work, where the kids go to school, where the nanny lives, and if you're taking care of Aunt Tilly, where Aunt Tilly lives, you can customize your alerts for your phones. With this one, I'm less sure because I'm already enrolled, so I haven't tried this.
Okay.
But with the standard web enrollment, you can customize it for up to 5 zip codes and get alerts for all 5 of those neighborhoods. And you'll also get the general all city alerts too. And then on the right it's a bunch of other notifications. So if your kid's in public school or just right, you probably want to check school notifications. If you take the ferry, you're going to check that. You don't really need parking suspension. I go to the 311 app. It's my favorite app, especially for Park Slope and Windsor Terrace, so that I can know if alternate side is canceled. Public health events, always want to sign up for those. But also, if there is a big public health event, we will be sending out a special message to say, do you want to get alerts that are just about COVID? If so, type this, and then you can subscribe, and then every so often they'll say, okay, if you want to unsubscribe, just hit, whatever the code is. If you go to the beach a lot, beach notifications, you don't need the CSO water body advisories, although if you kayak or do anything like that, I strongly recommend it. Did Christine come on?
No, she had an emergency with her father,
Oh,
which is exactly one of the reasons why if you have, and I guess he's in Long Island, to know what your family's plan is. So she did not make it.
okay. So Christine Doyle, who is an active member of the group, is one of our beloved NYC CERT volunteers, and CERT stands for Community Emergency Response Team. So they help us also do local presentations. They're trained to do first aid, line management. They help out the first responders, keeping everybody safe in Coney Island for the polar bear plunge. They also help out with line management and a lot of fireworks, Thanksgiving Day parade. There's just a host of things that we rely on them for. And this is our pitch to say, if you have some time and you want to give back to your community and volunteer, and you like the idea of really getting into preparedness and preparing your community, give a scan to the QR code. You would do your orientation this summer. The next training cycle starts in October. It's about 11 or 12 sessions, 5 weeks. It's actually 6 weeks. The last one is like the culminating disaster fire simulation where you put out a fire in the street. Half of it is hybrid and half of it is in person at 165 Cadman Plaza East, my office. And you do have to pass a background check, make a 1-year commitment, and you get to learn all this cool stuff. So if you're interested, apply tonight.
It's on my list when I retire.
Okay, so you got that. We're going to have one more person. How many years is that, Sue?
I don't know yet.
Okay. In the meantime, any of the other of you who have some extra time, please sign up. I'm going to skip this slide. This is what I do on my everyday work as I work in community preparedness, and our team has prepared over 50. By the end of June, we'll have prepared over 50 community networks across the city. And we do it by teaching them how to make a My Map on Google My Maps and make a resource guide. They learn how to do a needs assessment. They do their own communications plan. And also we show them how to manage donations and volunteers. And then they tie it all up into a great big giant comprehensive community emergency plan.
So if somebody wanted to bring this program or this presentation to a school or a church or whatever, do they contact you? Or is
No,
it
they would contact Ready New York.
okay?
So that's your original contact. They're the ones we have customized. This is not the kids' presentation. We have some really fun presentations for kids. We also have a faith specialist who brings it to houses of worship. Another one of my colleagues specializes in doing presentations for older adults and people with disabilities. So we really have tailored how to do this presentation to different kinds of communities. So that's why you want to contact. And that'll be on the last slide with the Ready New York email, which is right there. So if you're interested in bringing this, you could bring it into your workplace, another community group, a civic type of organization. Community prep is the program that I work with. So if you're interested in doing more like organizational type of preparedness, that's what we're there for. If you're interested in volunteering, that's the CERT address. And now I would be happy to take some questions. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and see what people have to say.
Well, the one thing that I wanted to say, and I was talking to Christine about this, is we can have, you all see my screen?
Almost.
This is the very
Yes.
beautiful, let's get ready New York. It's smart to get set for the unexpected. And so it's a nice, you can go through with your child all of these things, and it's done with colorful quips, and make a plan and get set ready, be ready to stay at home. So Christine was talking about getting us some of these so that we could have
Sure.
an event. So some good stuff here, or just download it. I don't know how it prints, but it's a way to bring this into a kid's life in a we're gonna die kind of way. Me to keep.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So we still have 11 people on this. I would love to see any questions that you might have about, I have a 2-year-old, I have a 10-year-old, questions about, this is pretty heavy stuff, and we're kind of trying to make it a little more light. But any questions about how to prepare our children, because this would be an emotional time, and a reminder for people to stay calm, because your kids are going to react based on how you react, correct?
100%.
So and it's the more you prepare, the more likely you are to be able to react in a positive way. So, or one of the reasons we're doing this today. We had 70 sign up and only 15 came to the presentation. And I think that's part and parcel to the fact that we're busy, but also like, this is a scary topic. Maybe I'll just watch it later. Any other questions? Any other comments? The other thing that we talked about before the presentation was volunteering your time, but also donating stuff. The amount of
Oh, yes. Yes, yes,
we
yes.
saw after Hurricane Sandy was crazy. We were doing a winter gear drive. The winter gear drive was at the Armory, and people were donating like thigh-high suede boots because they thought they were winter related. So tell us what you guys say about donations.
So we say, help us prevent the disaster after the disaster, and that cash is king. So you're much better off donating to the Red Cross or your local volunteer ambulance company or to a community fund than bringing in clothing or even buying things at the grocery is not useful, because it takes people to sort it. It takes a climate controlled room to store the items. And so Sue was talking about it. I've seen piles, mountains, rooms of clothing stored, donated for the people at the Twin Parks fire in the Bronx a couple years ago that had to be recycled, and most of it thrown out, quite frankly. Hurricane Maria had a problem with storage, and there was no power on the island of Puerto Rico, and people were sending just mounds of things there, and they couldn't even store the supplies they had. So, cash, even a small amount of cash, but multiplied by, your book club, your Girl Scout troop, whatever, that makes an impact, not bringing the physical things. Like, we feel a little bit better, but it doesn't really impact the families who need a little extra help. And I see Aubrey did ask for an example of alternative communication methods when cell phones aren't working and you don't have a landline. Okay, that's a very tricky question. So I like to say that even if if the cell towers go down, you may still be able to text. And there are some I think they're called proximity apps. We don't really we don't recommend them keep track of them because the technology changes so fast that it's hard, but it's been used in a lot of different disasters. A lot of people use Zello. That was like really big after Harvey in Texas. And then we have a team in Manhattan that's their how they're going to communicate with each other because they don't have the money to buy like a fancy radio system. You could get radios too, walkie-talkies, but you want to pay a little bit of money for them. You don't want to get the cheap ones, the cheapest ones on Amazon. That would not be good. But walkie-talkies are great. I know people that use them, but there are also apps that act like walkie-talkies. So this is something where, you know, if you do a little research, you'll be able to figure out what's the best fit for your family. And unfortunately, I don't have time to be able to keep up with it, but I don't think it's going to be too far. You'll have to go on Reddit to find it.
So somebody said, appreciating this call. I want to figure out how to print the kids guide. Yes, and we can get copies of that.
I love that.
We're going to have summer Fridays in the park. So maybe I can get one of those for June.
You can get, we can mail you some.
Yeah.
We
It's
can
just
mail you some. So that Ready New York, you make an account there. I know you were talking to Tony Ann, but you actually can make an account and order all the supplies. So you can order the My Plan and the kids guides, whatever you want, and have that party in the park, which is a fabulous way to get the information out.
excellent. I am thinking of involving my son, and it would include having him help and pack and write and organize. Does that make sense?
I love it.
Yeah.
The kid does it. He'll get it so much more if he does it than if you told him to do it. They're 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 fully capable of participating, and they'll remember it, and they'll remember that you had him do it too.
My mother says, she walked uphill, both ways in the snow, but she was babysitting at 10 years old, making dinner for the 3 kids she was
Oh
babysitting.
yeah.
And one of the things that we forget is how capable kids
Okay,
can
boy.
be. And so an 8-year-old to me sounds like their perfect age to do all of these things.
Yeah.
And
And
even
they
if
want to do it. Yeah.
and they want to do it, and it makes them feel like they're part of the family, and they're not just, this is their kid, here's the universe.
Oh yeah. I met a kid last year out at Staten Island. His dad was an EMT and his mom, I think his mom was worked in the schools, but he'd been schooled from like the time he was in diapers. He knew about a go bag. He had all that. He goes, and he had a shirt on like future EMT. He was just the most precious thing, 5th grade. And he knew, I would say he actually knew more than me when it came to EMT type of stuff. But yes, they are fully capable of doing this. And it's a fun activity and a different kind of activity to do too, you know?
Well, that was bada bing, bada boom, 8:30. We hit 1 hour on the mark, and I appreciate everything that you guys do. And I think that compared to the one we did in 2005, when there was nothing really available for families, the amount of work that emergency management has done to help prepare families is great. And unfortunately, I think that was partly because of all the different things that have happened that necessitated these things.
Yeah.
You don't know this, Jill, but my first daughter was born 3 days after 9/11.
Oh my God.
And my point of contact was my brother, who lived in DC and worked for the government. And he said, Brad, put a go bag together. And if I tell you to leave, you need to leave.
Oh my God.
It didn't happen. He's like, you just take care of that brand new baby. But scary time post
Yes.
9/11. So thanks everyone for coming. I hope this wasn't I'm going to just shove this in the back corner. This was I need to work on this. I have seen videos on Instagram that help you visualize how to pack a go bag or a go container. And on Amazon, you can probably buy most of this stuff in a ready-made kit. Obviously, the city of New York can't rubber stamp any of those because they're not allowed to do that. And so we're going to get the slide deck as a PDF. and send out the recording to everybody that's here and everybody who signed up, who's probably putting their kids to bed right now. Jill, thank you. That was fabulous.
You're
Appreciate.
so welcome. Thank you all.
For the people who are still here, if you would, in the chat, tell me one thing you walked away from, one thing you're going to take away from this presentation. Because I love seeing like, and how you feel about it. So one thing, the maps, yes.
Okay, that was an add-on. Thank you, Catherine.
Lots of work to do. Need to network the plan. Yes, yes. Gonna look into further. Yeah. I love the idea of the map for real estate findings.
I have been asked to consult with the real estate agent in my house as to whether or not a house was in the coastal flood zone. So, but my point is that it doesn't have to be in the coastal hurricane evacuation zone to have risks, particularly in our neighborhood because of our historical ecology and climate change.
Okay, fun fact. If you live on 8th Avenue, near